The sky broke open at 6:47 in the morning, and I was eating a mango. That detail has always stuck with me. Not the sirens that followed, not the emergency broadcasts crackling through every speaker in the city. Not even the sound, that deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from inside your chest rather than from above. Just the mango, half-peeled, juice running down my wrist, sitting on the step outside the barracks in Accra, when the first ship came through the clouds. It was beautiful. I want to be honest about that. Whatever else the Vreth were, their ships were extraordinary things. Smooth and dark, shaped like teardrops the size of small mountains, they descended through the atmosphere without a single flame, without a single trail of heat, just silence, and then presence. As if the sky had simply decided to become something else. My name is Yara Osei. I was a sergeant in the Ghanaian ground forces. I was 29 years old, and like every other soldier on Earth that morning, I had about 72 hours left before the war was over. They didn't fight us the way we expected. We had prepared for orbital bombardment, for laser strikes, for the science fiction of it. What we got instead was wait. The Vreth ships parked themselves above every capital city, every major port, every military installation on the planet, and they simply waited. No demands, no communications, just the ships, enormous and still, blocking out the sun over our most important places. After 18 hours, governments began to fold, not because they were cowardly, because there was nothing to shoot at. You cannot fight something that refuses to engage with you on your terms. You can only wait and feel the psychological mass of it pressing down until your own people begin to panic. I was captured on the third day, outside the city, running communications for a unit that no longer had anyone left to command. 3 Vreth soldiers stepped out of a ground vehicle and walked toward me. They were tall, around 2.5 meters, with 4 arms and pale, almost translucent skin. They moved with a careful, deliberate slowness that I first read as confidence. Later, I would understand it differently. The processing was efficient and cold. They tagged us with small devices that attached at the wrist and cataloged us the way a farmer might catalog tools. Useful, categorized, filed. Commander Sovkaal addressed the remaining population of Earth through a broadcast that reached every screen and radio and speaker still functioning. His translator converted his speech into every major human language with only a slight mechanical delay. He said, "Your planet registers 1.0 standard gravitation. This is within the ideal range for productive integration. Your population will serve in a transitional labor capacity. Cooperation will be rewarded. Resistance will not." That was it. No villain speech. No grand proclamation of conquest. Just a resource assessment, delivered the way you might read nutritional information from a label. We were practical to them. That was somehow worse than hatred. They put us in camps outside the major cities. The camps were organized and adequately supplied. The Vreth were not cruel in any obvious way. They needed us functional. They needed us working. And so they kept us fed and sheltered and tagged, and every morning they sent us out in labor teams to assist with the early stages of their settlement construction. I started watching them on the 3rd day of the camp. It was the buildings that gave it away first. Every structure the Vreth occupied was filled with a low, persistent hum, a sound you felt in your back teeth more than heard with your ears. The air inside their compounds had a particular quality to it, slightly easier to breathe, slightly lighter in a way that was difficult to name. At the time, I thought it was environmental control, temperature regulation, perhaps, or air filtration. It took me 2 more days to understand what it actually was. A dampener malfunctioned near our labor yard on a Tuesday morning. The hum stopped for 41 seconds. In those 41 seconds, 6 Vreth soldiers who had been standing near the outer boundary of the compound stumbled. 3 of them fell completely. 1 went down hard on one knee, and I could see, even from 30 meters away, that he was struggling to push himself back upright. They were not injured. They were not attacked. They simply experienced, for less than a minute, the unfiltered gravity of the world they had just conquered, and it nearly put them on the ground. I kept my expression completely neutral. I turned back to the section of wall I was supposed to be helping construct, and I kept my hands steady and my face still, and inside my head, a very quiet door opened. I began to think. The Vreth homeworld, I would later learn from documents that passed through our camp, orbited a gas giant at a significant distance. Their moon, Vreth Prime, had a gravitational pull of approximately 0.28 standard. Their entire biology, their entire civilization, had developed in that environment. Their bones were lightweight and efficient, built for a world that asked very little of them in terms of structural load. Their hearts were smaller relative to body size than ours. Their muscles, though capable of generating impressive short bursts of force, had no real endurance, because endurance is something you develop when the world makes constant demands on your body, and their world never had. They had conquered 12 other planets before Earth. Every single one of them had been a low-gravity world. The Vreth had, in 12 successful invasions, never once been required to function in an environment that matched our own. We were their first 1.0 gene conquest, and they had walked in wearing armor, carrying equipment, planning a long-term settlement, all of it designed and built for a world 3 times lighter than the one beneath their feet. They had gravity dampeners, yes, they had technology, but technology requires infrastructure. Infrastructure requires hubs, and hubs, I was beginning to understand, required protection that their soldiers could only provide from within their own comfortable bubble. I found the resistance 3 weeks later, or rather, the resistance found me. Kofi had been a civil infrastructure engineer before the invasion. He knew every power grid, every structural system, every load-bearing point in our region. Valentina had been a paratrooper from Chile, small, extremely calm, with the kind of physical patience that comes from jumping out of aircraft in bad weather. Dr. Hashimoto had been a robotics engineer in Osaka, and she had spent the weeks since her capture doing what engineers do, quietly studying everything around her, taking mental notes, and saying very little. We met in the corner of a supply structure where the cameras had a blind spot Kofi had identified in the first week. He unrolled a hand-drawn map on the floor between us. Every dampener zone, he said softly, runs from a central hub. The hubs are connected in a regional grid. There are 11 of them across the continent, and I believe the pattern holds globally. He looked at each of us. We don't attack their ships. We cannot reach their ships. But we can reach the hubs. The plan was simple in concept and terrifying in execution. Destroy the hubs simultaneously, across every continent, coordinated to the second. Not one at a time. That would give them the chance to evacuate, to adapt, to push their soldiers into ships and regroup, all of them, at once. Flood every Vreth-occupied zone on Earth with a single unmediated moment of this planet doing what it has always done. Valentina asked me, during one of the nights we spent planning, why I seemed so steady, not fearless. She was clear about that distinction, but steady, as if I was not particularly surprised by any of this. I told her about my grandmother. She had farmed terraced fields in the Volta Highlands her entire life. Steep, difficult land, the kind that most people would look at and decide was not worth working. She carried water uphill every day, until she was well into her 80s. She moved with a particular quality that I had always noticed as a child. A groundedness, a physical certainty, as if she and the earth were in an agreement. Her doctor told our family, when she passed, that her bone density was remarkable for any age, that her heart was exceptionally strong, that she had the internal architecture of someone who had spent a lifetime in physical negotiation with a demanding world. She never exercised, she never trained, she just lived, the way her mother had lived, and her mother's mother, going back farther than any of us could track. Ordinary life, in a place that asks something of your body every single day and received it, and in return, quietly made you more capable of giving it. That is what the Vreth did not understand when they assessed our planet. They measured the gravity. They calculated the resource value. They counted our population and categorized us as labor. What they did not measure, what they had no category for, was what living here had made us. Not soldiers, not warriors, just people who had spent millions of years on a world that never once let you take your own weight for granted. The operation took 3 weeks to organize across 6 continents, through signals that looked like nothing, weather data, agricultural timing transmissions, fragments embedded in the ordinary static of a partially destroyed communications network. Dr. Hashimoto designed the charge sequences. Kofi coordinated the hub locations. Valentina trained the teams. I ran communications, the same as I always had. Some skills are useful in every version of the world. We detonated at 03 o'clock UTC on a Thursday. I was standing in the labor yard when it happened, which was intentional. I wanted to see it without any barrier between me and the moment. The hum stopped. Not gradually, not with a flicker or a warning. One moment it was there. That constant, low presence that we had all grown so used to we had nearly stopped hearing it. And then it was simply gone. The air changed, not dramatically, not in any way a person standing in it would notice if they had lived there their whole lives. But I had been living near those dampener fields for weeks, and I noticed. The Vreth soldiers near the compound boundary noticed too. It happened at different speeds in different bodies, because biology is not uniform, and not all of them were in the same physical condition. But the pattern was consistent. The ones in full armor went first, because their equipment, calibrated for 0.28 grams, suddenly became a significant and hostile addition to their own body weight. A soldier in heavy Vreth armor on their homeworld was carrying a manageable load. A soldier in that same armor on Earth, with the dampener gone, was carrying something close to 3 times what their muscles had ever been trained to bear. They did not fall dramatically. That is the part that is hardest to explain. There was no explosive moment, no cinematic collapse. They just began to fail in small ways. A knee that could not hold, a back that curved forward under a weight it had no reference for, breathing that became labored as their hearts, slightly too small for the task being suddenly asked of them, worked harder than their design had intended. 11 minutes. That is how long it took for organized Vreth surface resistance to effectively end across all occupied zones on Earth. 11 minutes, and a planet. Sovkaal was found in his command structure, a building that had been a hotel before the occupation. He was on the floor, not unconscious. The Vreth were resilient, and he was senior command, which meant he was in better physical condition than most. But he was not standing, and he was not going to stand without assistance. His translator device was still functioning, and it delivered his words to me in clear, precise English as I walked into the room. He said, "This is not possible. You are the same gravity. You live in the same conditions. You should be experiencing the same limitation." I crouched down so that we were at the same level. The floor was cool. Through the open window I could hear the city beginning to make sounds again, tentative at first, like something waking up carefully and checking to see if the morning was real. "We do live in the same conditions," I said. "We've always lived in these conditions. We never had the option of anything else." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You built nothing to compensate." "No," I agreed. "We built ourselves instead." There is a particular kind of silence that follows when something genuinely new enters someone's understanding. Even across species, even with a translation device filling the space between us, I recognized it. Sovkaal had conquered 12 worlds. He had assessed resources, calculated yields, managed labor populations. He had never once lost. And it had not, until this moment, occurred to him to wonder whether the thing he was measuring, when he measured a planet, was the whole of what the planet was. I stood up and walked back outside. Lagos, my city, and not my city, having changed so many times in the years and months leading to this morning, was loud now, and getting louder. There were sirens that sounded different from the invasion sirens. There were voices. There were things being moved, and people calling out to each other across distances. Above, the Vreth fleet still held position. This was not finished. Anyone who thought 11 minutes on the ground was the end of something was not paying close enough attention. But down here, today, the ground was ours. I stood in the morning light and felt the familiar press of the world beneath my feet, the weight of the air, the specific quality of existing in a place that asks something of you every single moment and has never once apologized for it. My grandmother would have found this entire situation straightforwardly logical. Of course, the people shaped by this world could survive it. That was the arrangement. That had always been the arrangement. The sky was full of their ships. The city was full of our voices. Gravity, I had told people who would listen, was not our disadvantage. It was never our disadvantage. Every hard thing this planet had ever done to us, every demand it had made of our bodies across every generation that had ever lived and died and passed something forward, all of it had been, in its own patient and indifferent way, preparation. They came to take our world because it was ideal. They were right. It was ideal. just not for them.